Patrick Christie's here with Westminster. I'm here with Daniel Kawczynski, who's here to talk to us today about a few present topics. The EU withdrawal bill is obviously going on late into the night today, and so what do you make of Jeremy Corbyn telling his MPs to vote it down?
Well, it's a massive betrayal of millions of British people who voted for the Labour Party, thinking and expecting that they would acquiesce and comply with their manifesto, which was to respect the wishes of the British people in the referendum. Mr. Corbyn, for political expediency, is now trying to delay and obstruct this bill going through. But the chaos and mayhem that would ensue if this bill wasn't voted for would be very significant and detrimental for the United Kingdom. So I'm very, very sad that on such an issue of huge national strategic importance to Britain, Mr. Corbyn is playing political games.
And he's flip-flopped a bit, hasn't he, really? Because there was a time when he said, ruled out completely single market and customs union access, and then today he's left it very much on the table, which would obviously then mean free movement of people and things like that. I mean, this must be quite worrying for you, sat opposite him in the chamber there, not really knowing where he stands, I suppose.
Well, Mr. Corbyn and his colleagues have had countless machinations of what Brexit means. And if you look at the various interviews that they've given and the various different replies and possibilities they've given, it doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
You're either in the European Union or you're out of it. We are pulling out. It is going to be a clean Brexit, a proper Brexit, the sort of Brexit that the British people were expecting when they voted for it in unprecedented numbers last year. And that's why this bill is very important. But the actual negotiations are absolutely critical. Other countries have managed to negotiate trading agreements with the European Union. Norway has done it, Switzerland has done it, and so we must do it as well. But we must do it from the perspective of a clean Brexit.
We had Caroline Flint came out today and said that she was going to defy the Labour whip and not vote against the bill. She said, basically to honour the result of the referendum. Clearly, you would imagine a lot of Labour MPs are not going to do the same. They may well back their leaders. I mean, what would you say to them, really? Is it going against will of the people? Should they maybe change their course of action tonight?
Well, I very much hope that there will be more than the ones that you've just mentioned. Yeah. I think the Labour MPs who want to obstruct this bill will ultimately have to be held to account by their local Labour parties in their constituencies and by their constituents. I think that they will have a really hard time in explaining to their constituents who have voted overwhelmingly for Brexit in certain cases why they would want to obstruct the EU repeal bill, which is the fundamental plank of the whole process. It rather does smack of trying to put spokes in the wheel of this very, very important process. This bill is probably the most important bill that Parliament has passed since 1972.
Right.
I was born in January 1972 when we entered the European Union.
Yeah.
Actually, we entered the EEC.
Yeah.
So, this is a fundamentally important constitutional point, and I would urge Labour MPs to have the courage of their convictions and to comply with the wishes of their electorate.
And so, touching on staying on the EU, really, I mean, how do you think the Brexit talks are going so far? And there's a lot of talk at the minute. Michel Barnier looked very deflated at the last press conference that they had. Do you think we will get a deal? Do we want a deal? Should we be aiming for one, or should we just leave now? What do you think?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has played a blinder by appointing David Davis as the Brexit Secretary. From what I know of him, I've known him for 12 years in Parliament. He's a tough Yorkshireman, and he will not flinch from ensuring that Britain gets the very best possible deal. I think he's the right man for the job. I think in my discussions with Polish government officials and others, I think they are starting to see the damage for them of the way in which Monsieur Barnier is conducting these negotiations. Don't forget the European Commission. This is the beating heart of the monster. This is for them harmonization, collectivization, almost a modern day version of communism for the whole of the European Union. This central control is everything. And they don't want to give the precedent of a member state leaving successfully, cleanly, in the win-win scenario, and then of course thriving outside the European Union. And this is their big fear. And by the way, your listeners ought to know this country is going to thrive like it hasn't done for decades outside the European Union, unconstrained with the red tape and bureaucracy. We will thrive in the international world. And so Barnier is trying to make life as difficult as possible. But what I want to say to you is that we shouldn't be frightened of pulling away without a deal and going to WTO terms. At the moment, if we went to WTO terms, British companies would have to pay around about £5 billion in duty exporting their products to the European Union.
Yeah.
Because of the massive trade deficit that we have with the European Union of £69 billion a year, we would receive £13 billion
Right, okay.
in revenue from all the European countries exporting to the United Kingdom.
Right.
So the exchequer would have net approximately £5 billion extra of revenue, some of which could be used in the short to medium term to help British companies with those additional expenses. And of course, in the long term, they will start to export to these huge emerging markets, which is the future for British trade. China, India, Brazil, Indonesia. Every year that I've been a member of Parliament, our exports to the European Union have fallen. Every year as a percentage of our total exports overseas. Why? Because the European Union is getting smaller every year as a percentage of the global economy, and these other huge emerging economies are growing exponentially. So the future is not trading with the European Union. The future is trading with these colossal new emerging countries.
And I also want to ask you, you're an MP with a very strong Polish connection and connection to that part of the world. So I'd like to tap into that a bit, really. I mean, what's your experience and your impression of how the Poles and how maybe a lot of Eastern Europe are viewing the European Union at the minute? Because there's been various constraints. Some would regard it as kind of EU bullying some of these countries, especially with regards to border controls and things like that. But also, maybe is that an area Britain can tap into post-Brexit and help build the relations with those countries in that part of the world?
Absolutely, and that's one of the most important questions you've posed already. The United Kingdom has to show real leadership with Central and Eastern European countries. The Visegrad Group, which is Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, is emerging as a very cohesive, very important entity in Central and Eastern Europe. And these countries, what are they interested in? They're interested in, not surprisingly, when we came out of the EPP-ED group, it was the Poles and the Czechs who joined us in forming the new right-of-centre non-federalist bloc in the European Parliament, not surprisingly. Cameron signed the agreement with Mr. Topolánek, the then Czech Prime Minister, and we negotiated with the Czechs and the Poles to form this new group. They are interested in two things: defence, not surprisingly, and trade. And we are, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and as the largest military power in Europe, they look to Britain to help protect and safeguard their sovereignty from any imminent threat which may come. I'm very proud that 150 British soldiers have been sent to Poland, and I hope that that deployment is a prelude to a permanent NATO base in eastern Poland. And Britain has a huge role in. Britain has always safeguarded and maintained European security. It's always been a responsibility peculiar to the United Kingdom, given our size and importance in the continent. And the biggest threat to national security comes from German and French demands to usurp NATO's supremacy and create a single European army. That would be a disaster. The European Union does not have a pedigree for undertaking projects successfully, whether it's the euro, whether it's massive youth unemployment, whether it's the crisis in Greece.
Absolutely.
And to give them the responsibility of protecting Europe through a single European army would lead to great instability and a resurgence, I would say, of Russian aggression towards some of these states. So as we pull out, we have to work with these countries to make sure that German plans to have a single European army are thwarted. Our security and defense are anchored in the involvement of the Americans and Canadians. They have come to our defense in 2 world wars.
Yeah.
And we cannot have a defense mechanism which does not involve the Americans and the Canadians. And there are other countries that will never join the European Union. Turkey,
Yeah.
Norway, Iceland, and now the United Kingdom, all important members of NATO, but outside of the European Union. So I think we have to show great leadership to these countries about our commitment to them through defence and NATO.
And just lastly, so countries like Poland, Hungary as well, you touched on, what is the kind of sentiment there towards the EU at the minute? It does seem like a lot of what we're getting is maybe a bit overtly negative from these countries in terms of their opinion of Brussels at the moment. What do you think?
Well, it just goes to show the hypocrisy both of Berlin and Paris. They are very, very worried, in the first instance, they are very, very worried about the double standards from both of these countries. Germany expects a common energy policy, but she is in the process of building an undersea oil and gas pipeline directly from Germany to Russia, bypassing the whole of Central and Eastern Europe. That is causing great concern amongst these countries. Macron, you will know,
Absolutely.
has made some extraordinary statements about preventing the movement of workers from Poland and other areas to France. And you're fully aware of some of the difficulties that he has with this, but those are fundamental planks of the European Union, the free movement of labour.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there are double standards both from Berlin and from Paris, but what they really object to is the interference in their domestic affairs. The Poles are now starting to see what we've had to put up with for 40 years. They are being threatened with sanctions, they're being threatened with having their voting rights taken away because they're not complying with what Berlin and Brussels wants. Certain allocation of Syrian refugees. They are making changes to the constitutional court and the judiciary, which Brussels doesn't like. And the Poles are getting very, very agitated about the amount of interference in their domestic affairs. Don't forget, these Central and Eastern European countries had no freedom at all for 50 years, trapped behind the Iron Curtain. They are particularly sensitive to their sovereignty and the supremacy of their own parliaments. And during the course of your lifetime, and I will give you a bet now, Patrick, but during the course of your lifetime, we will not be the only country that pulls out of the European Union. Others will follow. To be the first to do something is always difficult. But you lay out a path for others, with breadcrumbs, for others to follow you. And as we show the world how successful life is outside the European Union for a European country, so others, when they see this continued interference in their domestic affairs, they will follow. I have every confidence in that. And I will end by saying this. Poland is a massive net recipient of EU funds.
Yeah.
I could take you to beautiful new motorways, bridges, ports, everything paid for with British taxpayers' money, European money. When we pull out, that's 20% of the budget gone overnight. And as these economies grow, and Poland's economy is, at the moment is growing 4.3% per annum, they will become net contributors to the budget. And that is the moment when their politicians will start to realise that we're now spending our taxpayers' money on this project, which is inefficient and is still interfering in our domestic affairs. And that's when some of these countries will turn and they will realise. And what will happen is that there will be two Europes. A Europe of ever closer political union with a single currency, a single foreign policy, harmonisation across all the countries, and an alternative, which is led by Britain, which is a Europe of Norway, Turkey, I hope, Turkey, Iceland, Switzerland, and other countries will join, which is what we always wanted and expected. A trading bloc, a bloc which minimizes the impediments to trade, but nothing else, and safeguards and protects the sovereignty of each parliament. So the idea that we have a one system that fits all straitjacket for Europe is a completely outdated process. No other group of countries in the world has attempted to do this. It's starting to fail spectacularly. Britain is pulling out just at the right moment, and Britain will lead the alternatives to the European Union in Europe in years to come.
Excellent. Daniel Kawczynski, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have you here on Westminster. Hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you, Patrick.
Take care.